talking to a film casting director once, and she said to me, as soon as I saw your show reel, I knew you were a dancer from the way that you move. And I think when I am, recording the different characters, I am quite physical in the studio because physicality helps with the character, even though I'm sitting down or sometimes standing up in front of a microphone.
This is the Listening Books Podcast. I'm Jessica Stone, and today's conversation is with Jane McDowell, a talented actress and narrator with many credits to her name, including the Dr Ruth Galloway mystery series by Elly Griffiths. In this conversation, Jane tells us what it was like to record the last book of the series, The Locked Room, during a lockdown. So, Jane, thank you so much for making the time to talk with me today. How did you find your way into audiobook narration?
When I was 17, I had a friend who worked in the audiovisual business, and he asked my mum if I could do a voiceover, and I'd never heard of this phrase voiceover. And it was for a Dutch company, and I recorded it at an art centre called South Hill Park. And I remember I was paid £80 for about 2 hours work, which was a lot of money when I was 17. And I absolutely loved it. And I had a brilliant time. And what I remember about it is that I made a mistake. I talked about, there was a line, put the cases in the boot. And I said, put the cash in the boot. And I was so embarrassed that I got it wrong. And they just laughed. They were lovely. But that was the first time I'd ever done a voiceover. And I thought, wow, I really love this. And then a few years later, when I was married and living in Newcastle upon Tyne, I got into doing audiobooks for a company called Soundings. And I was useful because I had an RP voice up in Geordieland. And they loved my work. So I got into doing it that way. And then I think at some point I approached the BBC Audiobooks, as was, who became Audio Go. Unfortunately, don't exist any longer. And to be honest, there's lots of people endeavouring to get into this business. So I didn't think, even though I was very experienced, but I think what helped me was that I speak fluent Italian. And that was my sort of USP, if you like. And they were recording a series of books. I remember the first one I ever recorded for BBC was Delicious by Nicki Pellegrino. And they needed someone who could do the pronunciations, who was familiar with the culture. And funnily enough, I re-recorded it recently for RNIB, the Royal National Institute for the Blind. And actors and friends have always said, I remember someone said to me when I was really young, your great strength is your voice. You should, look into that. So, and it's fun. I like sitting in a studio and I read books I probably wouldn't otherwise read. I've read some absolutely cracking, such interesting books that I probably wouldn't, pick up in a library, and learnt so much about so many diverse and interesting subjects.
Had you listened to audiobooks before you sought out doing them?
Not really, but I've always loved the radio and the plays on the radio. I listen to Radio 4 and I like The Archers. And I like all the comedy programs and the short story and the series and everything. In many ways, I prefer the radio to television because your imagination creates the pictures. So I'd listen to that. But no, I do listen to audiobooks in the car.
You do?
Luckily, I've got a CD player in my car, which is probably quite unusual. On a long journey, they're fantastic. So I listen to Antonia's, that's my daughter.
Yes.
And other books that I fancy.
You were saying that reading or narrating audiobooks has led you to read books that you would never have picked up on your own. What sort of books are you likely to pick up on your own as a reader? And has that changed?
Yes. I mean, I still like to read proper books. So I still go to the library and I like an actual physical book because for this part of my work, I read off a screen. That's fine because it's practically much easier. In the old days, you'd have to very quietly turn pages or they'd edit it out. But now I read off my iPad. But when I'm reading for pleasure, I'll read proper books. So I would definitely have picked up the nature books, the Curlew Moon about the curlews and the Hidden World of the Fox, about the lives of foxes. I probably wouldn't have picked up Snow Widows that I was asked to read about the second ill-fated Antarctic expedition by Captain Scott on the Terra Nova. And it's called Snow Widows because it's told from the perspective of the 5 women who were left behind, the wives and girlfriends and mother of one of them. So, and it was a fascinating book. I loved it. I didn't like the way they treated animals, horses and dogs, but that's what happened then. But it was such an insight into a forgotten age, into Edwardian England. And they lived, they became real people and not just, caricatures of people at the turn of the 20th century. So I probably wouldn't have read that. I love psychological thrillers. I'm an absolute, I love them. I love to watch them on television. I love the Scandi Noir. I watched The Killing, The Bridge.
Oh, yeah.
But I like twisty thrillers. And I like biographies and autobiographies, so people that I'm interested in. So I recorded the biography of Rudolf Nureyev and Václav Nijinsky, and I was a ballet dancer. So to me, that was absolutely fascinating. And I did once, I didn't meet Nureyev, but he walked past me when I was doing a class. I was a little girl and I was completely starstruck.
I was just thinking there, like, you're not the first narrator that I've talked to who has a background in dancing.
Oh, interesting.
What I find interesting about it is, I guess, that embodiment that that adds to a vocal performance.
Yeah, that's so interesting. You say that, yeah.
Yeah. Say more about that.
So when you read an unabridged audiobook, obviously you do all of the characters. And that's such an interesting thing that you say, Jessica. I've never actually thought of that, but I remember talking to a film casting director once, and she said to me, as soon as I saw your show reel, I knew you were a dancer from the way that you move. Oh. And I think when I am, recording the different characters, I am quite physical in the studio because physicality helps with the character, even though I'm sitting down or sometimes standing up in front of a microphone. How you stand and how you breathe and how you, different characters have different tempos, if you like. Some people are very fast and very quick, and some have a more measured, slow way of communicating. And often as an actor, I've done a lot of method training. I've done lots of different trainings, but one of the things you do is animal work. So you find an animal that works with a character. So it might be a cat, or it might be a meerkat, or it might be a spider. So at some level, that comes into it as well, to create a character, because obviously you've only got the voice. And often there's an accent as well. So I've had to learn. I'm pretty good at accents because I'm musical. I can sing and I play the piano, but often I've had to learn new accents. Like I had to learn a Korean accent for a book. Norfolk for the Elly Griffiths, Ruth Galloway series.
That's right.
Is a really difficult accent. So I've got a friend from Norfolk, so she coached me, and it's a very specific accent. I hope I got it right.
Is it second nature to you now after doing, 10 of those books?
Yes, I can do it. I would still, I think that the series is finished now. I won't say what happens, just because I don't want to spoil it for your listeners. But the story of Ruth and Nelson is the thing that runs all the way through it. She's the forensic archaeologist who's the main character. And the other main character is Detective Inspector Harry Nelson, who appears to be a sort of rather gruff, unreconstructed policeman from Blackpool. But actually, he's a deeply sensitive and loving man, and they get into a relationship. And this runs through all of the books, and they have a child together. He's married. She's not. So I won't say the outcome because it might, as I say, spoil it for people.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation with Jane McDowell. It's that time of year again when you might appreciate knowing that you can give the gift of audio this Christmas. Make a loved one's year by giving them access to over 10,000 audiobooks and 7,000 newspapers and magazines for a whole year for just £20. Terms and conditions do apply. Visit our website for more information. That's www.listening-books.org.uk. Or follow the link directly to the gift membership page in the show notes. If we just talk briefly about The Locked Room, again, without any spoilers, but this is the latest and we think last of the Dr. Ruth Galloway series. And it's set in a cottage in Norfolk during a COVID lockdown.
Yes.
And I was just sort of wondering what recording that was like and whether, was there a lockdown going on when you were recording, or was that all behind us?
There was. No, it was going on. Through the sort of 2 or 3 years of the pandemic, I was very fortunate because I've got my own setup. So I was able to record a lot at home. However, the books now, I started off recording those for BBC audiobooks. But now, I think the publisher changed. I think it's Quercus now. And I now record them at a lovely studio in Soho called Heavy Entertainment. And I went to the studio. It was just me. And I think for one of them, because I recorded The Locked Room and then there was the one before that. But I think on one occasion it was down the line. So the producer wasn't even there. It was literally just me.
Oh, wow.
And I think on the other occasion, the producer was there, which is always nicer to have them physically there. But I did go to the studio to record those.
Yeah. Did that feel, did it add more of a sinister layer to your experience of the COVID lockdown?
Yeah, it did, because it was a frightening time. None of us knew what was happening. It was this new thing that was out there, and we only had what, the media were telling us, and it just felt like quite a, frightening and unstable time. So to be on your own in a studio and to be in a city I love, London, which was, practically deserted, it felt very dystopian and odd. So yes, it did add to it. And I love the book. I loved all of them, but in this one, I think it's where Ruth finds a picture. She lives in one of 3 remote cottages on the edges of the marshland in Norfolk, and she loves the wildness and the remoteness of it. And Harry Nelson can't understand it. He thinks she should move to the city, and he can't understand why Ruth loves to be so isolated. And she has her daughter by now, Katie, as he always calls her, which annoys Ruth. And she finds a photograph. Her mother has died, and she finds a photograph of the house, her pink cottage, long before she moved there. And this runs alongside there's a killing and a body is discovered, bones, and Ruth, because she's an archaeologist, is always called in because she's the bones expert. But alongside this story is her own journey of self-discovery and her roots. And she finds out why her mother has a photograph of her cottage long before she ever moved there. And interestingly, with Elly Griffiths, who I actually met because, I don't know if you know, but her real name is Domenica Di Rosa. She's Italian.
Oh, wow.
And I've also recorded some of her books set in Italy, which I loved. But we met in Brighton, and she was just lovely. And she said, "You are Ruth to me. You are Ruth Galloway," which was just lovely. She was a lovely lady.
Yeah, no better compliment, really.
No, true.
You know how you were saying that in some of your training you used animals to get into character.
Yeah.
Was there an animal that you associated with Ruth to get her sort of character?
Yes, I think Ruth is nothing like me physically. I'm small and slim and quite quick. And in the story, Nelson's wife, who is called Michelle, is probably more like me physically. She's small and slim. Ruth is, it's very interesting how Elly describes her. Because it's an ongoing thing throughout the whole books that Ruth battles with her weight. She loves food and she's a little bit overweight, but Nelson loves her body and her curves, but she's definitely taller and a bigger girl than I am. So she was just more of a solid sort of animal, nothing unkind. I mean, Not like an elephant or anything like that, but she, I can't remember what animal I had for her. I think it was more in the posture that she's an academic, she's super intelligent, she's very measured, she's a true feminist. She takes on, the annoying men in her department, and she's just very grounded. And so I think it was more about being sort of slower and more sort of, her center of gravity is kind of here. And she's a very calm person. She doesn't, fly off the handle, but she deals very effectively. So she was just that little bit slower than I am naturally in real life, but a commanding presence. And I imagine her as very, very beautiful, very statuesque, quite tall and just quite magnificent physically. I see her as someone dark as well. I think she's dark. I don't know if Elly tells us that, but to me, she has dark hair. And also she's a true academic in that she's quite untidy, which I am as well, which drives my daughter mad, and a little bit haphazard. So there's lovely descriptions about when she first invites Nelson for dinner and she cooks. I forget what she cooks, but she cooks for him. And in the book, he describes it that it's all rather chaotic, but it's surprisingly good. So she kind of throws stuff together. And she likes Radio 4, like I do. And she likes books and she likes animals. And she loves her cat. She loses one quite early on in one of the books. But she loves Norfolk and she loves the wildness of it. So I relate to that.
It sounds like the two of you would be good friends were she a real person.
I think we'd be very good friends. Yeah, I'd love to meet her. And Nelson was more like a Black Panther. He loves to be fast. He loves driving too fast. He likes challenging his superiors. He's quite, he likes doing stuff on his own. He's quite insular in many ways. He doesn't like his boss, Jo, because she does yoga and she likes to send him on, in his view, useless courses about communication and, how to communicate with women and, sexism and stuff like that. He is quite sexist as well in some ways, but he has deep respect and love for Ruth. And I love their story.
Oh. Do you ever find it quite lonely to narrate audiobooks?
It can be. I mean, in a way I like it because I can work from home, which is obviously convenient. The challenges are that although I've got, a state-of-the-art studio, this I'm very happy to say is recycled ocean plastic, which makes me very happy. It's like the old egg foam insulation, so it's very, very good. It still doesn't completely eliminate all noise. So if there's a plane and we are near Heathrow Airport, or if our dogs bark, I have to stop. But to be honest, even when I record at Heavy Entertainment, which is in Soho, which is a wonderful studio, and it's a room within a room, so it's a vacuum, you can still hear and feel the underground trains. So even then, we sometimes have to stop because the microphones are so sensitive that they will pick up, especially low noise like that. But I love going to the studio as well because it's fun to travel and to go into London. Or I record also in Oxford. I record for a company called ISIS Audiobooks. I've been doing that for many years, and I love going to Oxford. And I record at a studio in Chiswick. I record at the RNIB, who are based in Camden. And Camden's always a cool place to, wander around when you're finished.
Yes.
So it's kind of more of an event to travel to a studio and, see producers and actor friends. Although I have to say, since lockdown, a lot of recording is down the line. So I recorded a series of the Italian books, actually, at the RNIB a few months ago. And it was just me. And I was talking to the producer down the line. So it was a bit lonely.
Yeah. Now, we've talked about some of the crime fiction that you've done, the thrillers, which you've obviously done quite a bit of. But I think you've done quite a number of other genres as well. I wonder if you could tell me a little about some of your favorite genres to work in, and if there's a genre that you'd like to do that you haven't done yet.
I love the psychological thrillers. I've done a lot of those. I love biographies and autobiographies. So I did the Nureyev and the Nijinsky, as I mentioned. For many years, I recorded the BBC audio guide to the proms. And I love music and I love the proms. So that was challenging because it's a global music event. And there were so many pronunciations of names and music. So I had to have a lot of help with that to get those right. I'm a passionate about animals and animal rights, so I love nature books. The two that come to mind are a beautiful book called Curlew Moon, which is about the curlew, which was profoundly moving because I think in the last 20 years, the Eurasian curlew's numbers have halved because of habitat loss. And if we're not careful, it's going to be the next great orc and they're going to disappear. But it was just the most wonderful book. The writer takes us from the west coast of Ireland, which are their breeding grounds, to Wales, where they nest. Then they hatch in England, and then finally the east coast of England, Lincolnshire, where they fledge. And I don't know if you've ever heard of curlew, but their cries are so haunting. They just embody wild places. And we're losing those wild places. So I just found it emotional to read it because I love nature and I'm always rescuing animals and birds, and we need to look after them. And then the other book I loved was the Hidden World of the Fox, which is by a fantastic writer called Adele Brand. And it's about one of our most beautiful and enigmatic species. Fascinating story about how they can survive. You know, they live very successfully in inner cities. They also live in forests. They live in deserts. They live all over the world and they can survive. It's quite incredible. And again, I found it very moving. And I get very cross when people talk about urban foxes and that they're a nuisance and a pest. And I say they're not. They're canids. They're dogs. They're related. If you have dogs, and you love your dogs, they're related to dogs. And actually, London was wild wood at one time, and they were there first. So they have more right to be there than we do. We are the intruders, and we have stolen their habitat. So I love seeing them, and I will feed them. And I belong to a couple of charities who rescue foxes, the Fox Project, and this wonderful mad lady called Kitty Heath, who runs Mama Cat Fox Rescue, who treats them for mange, rescues the injured ones, looks after them, releases them if possible. And it was just such an interesting book about their society and how they look after each other and how they care for their young and their mating cries, which are astonishing. You've probably heard foxes,
yes.
But it's quite alarming, but that's how they communicate with each other.
I think that's one of the theories for the origin of, the Irish folklore, the banshee. I think the fox mating cry is one of the...
Yes, the cry of the fox. Yeah. Yes, of course.
Yeah. It's funny we're talking about this because this morning I was up much earlier than I normally would be. But you know how if you wake up with a sudden adrenaline rush, there's no point going back to sleep. So you just go ahead and get up.
Exactly.
And it's beautiful. It was a beautiful dawn. But when I sat down at the kitchen table to have my coffee, I saw movement outside the window and I thought, oh, how did the cat get outside?
Oh.
But it wasn't the cat. It was a fox that came right up, like, in full view of the window.
Oh, my God.
And I stayed perfectly still because I didn't want to scare it off. And unfortunately, my phone was across the room, so I couldn't take a picture without actually scaring it away. So I just sat there kind of breathless watching it. And then something spooked it eventually and it ran away. But it was magical just to watch it creep up so close.
It is. Yeah. This book was lovely. It's a love letter to the fox, really. And it's also about we have to find a way to peacefully coexist with them because they have as much right to live and, thrive as we do. So, yes, I love those. What else? I love the historical books. I read a cracking book, The Tudors, which just is about one of the most powerful families in English history. And what was so interesting about it was that in some ways it was quite random how it came about. It was because I think it was Katherine de Valois fancied a Welsh. I think he was a nobleman, but he was called Owen Tudor, and got together with him, and that is how the Tudor dynasty started, and it changed the course of English history, as we know, because we were Catholic, and after Henry VIII, he broke from Rome and all the rest of it, and we've become a Church of England, and that was all down to him. And it read like a thriller. I mean, monstrous character, but fascinating. And then, of course, I also recorded the Confessions of Catherine Howard about his fifth wife. He had tired of number 4, which was Anne of Cleves, the Dutch mare, as he rather cruelly called her. And he married Catherine Howard, who was a very immature, flighty young piece, and she rather stupidly had an affair with one of the courtiers, Thomas Culpeper, and Henry had her executed for it. The story actually runs alongside, it's Catherine and then her friend, Catherine Tilney, who works in the palace, and she knows all of her secrets. So again, it was like a sort of a thriller. And again, it's an insight into Tudor England. So all sorts of things. Like I learned that they used, for contraception, they used lemon halves.
What?
Who knew?
Oh my.
Oh my, yeah. That's just one of the things I remember.
Goodness. The things you learn.
The things you learn, indeed. No, I was only going to say that another book that I read that I found profoundly moving, true story, it's called A Killer's Confession, and it's about a mother's fight for justice. It's the murder of 2 women, Becky Godden-Edwards and Sian O'Callaghan. And because of what was viewed as a mistake by a policeman who was actually brilliant and found Becky's killer and Sian's killer, it was a taxi driver called Christopher Halliwell, he was punished and the killer got away. And the mother, Karen, the girl, Becky, was missing for 8 years, which was obviously agonizing. But then the story, A Killer's Confession, is about her fight for justice. And she gets a petition together and she takes it all the way to the Home Office. And eventually she does get justice with the help of this wonderful policeman, Stephen Fulcher. But because if I remember rightly, what happens is he arrests Christopher Halliwell, but because he doesn't offer him a solicitor, he's broken the police protocol. And because of that, he gets away the first time. But she keeps fighting, and eventually she gets justice for her daughter. And I just found it so moving and so emotional to record that book, knowing also that it's true. And I wrote to her afterwards to say, just, thank you for writing this book. I found it quite hard to read in parts. It's, such an incredible and moving story.
Wow, yes. I mean, to be moved to the point that you would actually write her to tell her, it really must have been quite the experience. Thank you for that recommendation, actually. You've given lots of wonderful recommendations.
Good.
Do you know what? I think I'll close us out with just something a little lighthearted, maybe, because we have talked about a few heavy things.
Yeah.
I'm always curious to know what your favorite warm-up is before you begin recording.
Humming, singing. If I'm walking the dogs, I hum all the way around the field and through the woods. I do some scales on the piano. Drink lots of water. Obviously, no chocolate or anything like that. That's really bad for the voice. Even tea and coffee. So just drink loads of water. And I'd say humming and singing.
Thank you so much, Jane. And thank you for not only all the recommendations, but your thoughtful answers and the time you've given this morning. Really appreciate that.
It's my pleasure.
And thank you, as always, for listening. You can find the Dr. Ruth Galloway series and The Confession of Katherine Howard, and indeed more of Jane's work, in our collection at Listening Books or wherever you listen to audiobooks. Next week, I'm bringing you a conversation with the lovely Stephanie Cannon, narrator of Kate Dillon's Mindwalker series, and I'd love for you to join us. Make sure you're following the podcast on your favourite podcast player. I just don't want you to miss it. This podcast is produced by Listening Books, a UK charity that provides an audiobook lending service for over 120,000 members who find that an illness, disability, learning difficulty, or mental health condition affects their ability to read the printed word or hold a book. It's simple to join. For more information, head to our website www.listening-books.org.uk.